Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 51st ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Denver Broncos insider Benjamin Allbright. Benjamin, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Oh man, I never started out wanting to do this. This was never a thing that was intentional or any of that kind of stuff. I kind of backdoored my way into it. Um, I think most people know I was in the army for a significant amount of
Yeah.
time, and after I got out of the army, I started a tech company. I ended up selling that and sort of retiring for a while, and wound up starting a Twitter account and then backdooring my way into this, which has been a lot of fun.
Now, were you always interested in sports, though, even when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, I was always a
Yeah.
football fanatic
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. I love the game. That's the thing. People always ask me what my favorite team is, and there are assumptions because I grew up in Kansas City for a while that the Chiefs were my team or whatever when I was a kid, and now that I cover the Broncos, I think people assume the Broncos are my team or whatever. I just love the game. I've always loved the game. I always will love the game, and makes my job easier when the Broncos win, though. I'll say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as a longtime radio host, what's three things that you wish you could go back and tell your younger self about the sports industry?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think the first thing I would tell myself is not to get too caught up in um, what it is that you think you need to be.
Mhm.
Just go out there and be you, right? And everything else will fall into place from there, one way or the other. I think I spent a lot of time trying to shape content or shape my images to what I thought other people felt like they needed me to be, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And um, that was certainly a mistake. Yeah, I'd probably get out in front of the streaming thing a little bit more. A few years ago, I tried to kind of pitch some of the ideas and some of the things about some of the digital space, and that was largely ignored. And now that's pervasive. I mean, if you don't have a digital presence, you're not existent, basically. Um, so the simultaneous sort of like YouTube streaming of radio
Mhm.
shows. I feel like a lot of radio people who felt like radio was the prestige piece and that kind of stuff was superfluous, have kind of become dinosaurs along the way. So that'd be two things. What else would I tell myself? Not to bet on Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks against the New England Patriots because I lost a boatload on that one. So maybe I'd tell myself that.
Yeah, I love that last one. And getting into some Broncos talk, last week, the Broncos signed Talanoa Hufanga to a 3-year contract worth up to $45 million. Hufanga's 2023 season was cut short due to a torn ACL, and then in 2024, he played just 7 games before suffering torn wrist ligaments that once again ended his season. He's obviously dealt with a few injuries in the past. Do you see that as something that potentially concerns you now that he's with Denver?
Um, I mean, I think anytime you sign a player that's got a little bit of an injury history, and the Broncos signed a few of them. I mean, Ingram's been hurt, Greenlaw's been hurt,
Yeah.
Hufanga's obviously been hurt. So I think anytime you do that, there is sort of that, in the back of your mind, like, hey, wait a minute, those are a lot of guys who have been hurt. But then you also, it's football. Everybody's been hurt
Mm,
at one point or another. And so um, I think there is in the back of your mind, no matter what, there's sort of that thing. But um, I think you just have to, you have to put guys out there and hope for the best. Injuries can happen on any play, and so I don't think you sit there and you worry about that too much. I think if somebody's got a lengthy injury history, maybe you have health incentives in their contract, playtime incentives, those kinds of things in their contracts. But beyond that, I mean, I don't think you can. I don't think it is something you can worry about. Like I
mm.
said, the random nature of injuries with each play, yeah, I don't think it's something you can worry about.
Yeah, as you said, everyone deals with injuries at one point throughout their career. And one of those guys that you mentioned was Dre Greenlaw, who the Broncos just signed from the 49ers as well. 3-year, $35 million contract. Greenlaw played just 2 games last year after suffering a torn Achilles in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. What can we expect to see from him? I know he played towards the end of last year, but what can we expect to see? This is hopefully his first full season back from that injury. Are we going to see any of that injury affect him this year as well?
Well, you hope not. I mean,
Mhm.
that's part of it when you sign him. You hope not. you go back and look at the last bit of tape you have on the guy, and you hope that he's trending in the right direction, and you go from there. I think Greenlaw's an aggressive player,
Yeah.
and it certainly adds something to any defense that he's in. I think you're kind of hoping that he brings that to the Broncos. But again, this is one of those things where like you can't predict injuries, like you just can't. And so I think you're just hoping that he's fully recovered from what he went through, and you hope that as you go through camp and get in the season, that he's just getting healthier and healthier, and is going to be hopefully a 17 game starter for the Broncos.
Yeah, and another major move that Denver made was signing tight end Evan Ingram to a 2-year, $23 million deal. Ingram had just 365 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown last year. And of course, he played just 9 games. He was injured as well. He's another one of those guys. What can we expect to see from him on the field in 2025?
Well, I think a lot of people, the term here that gets thrown around too much is the joker or whatever, which is really just a mismatch player.
Mhm,
I don't know that, I mean, Ingram's career hasn't really been that. He's
mhm.
mostly just been a big slot guy, right?
Yeah.
He's not really much of an inline guy. 20% of his reps, I think, inline. He's not much of an inline guy. He's more of a big slot guy. And so I think that's kind of his role in Denver. Maybe they try to use him in a few mismatch type areas or whatever, but I think the reality is that he probably takes over the Lil Jordan Humphrey role, in the offense. Humphrey, of course, tried to put weight on and become a tight end, so that's sort of interesting if you're a Broncos fan. But I think the production of Evan Ingram has never really matched the legend of Evan Ingram in terms of his name. Now he gets spammed a lot of targets. I think it was like 2 years ago, where they spammed him a bunch of targets around the line of scrimmage or whatever. But he's been a declining production guy for a few years, and so I think I think they have an idea of what they want to do with him in this offense. But he's never really been a big touchdown guy. I mean, he's mostly, in most seasons it's 3 touchdowns a year. Now he's mostly been a between the twenties sort of big slot guy, and I imagine that's sort of what his role will be here in Denver.
Yeah, and another guy who the Broncos re-signed, DJ Jones, defensive tackle, to a 3-year, $39 million contract. How's this going to affect the defense? What could he look like? I know I want to get into some of the other defensive line positions, some other players that could potentially get extensions later on. But, he's one that's already gotten his contract. What can we expect to see from him?
Well, I mean, DJ is one of the best run plug guys in the league. That's sort
Mhm,
of been his niche. He's not going to put up big sack total numbers or anything, but
mhm,
one of the better run defenders in the league. I honestly didn't think they were going to get that deal done with him. I thought I thought there was going to be too much money. I thought they'd look elsewhere, maybe a Puna Ford, that kind of thing. But they wound up bringing DJ back, who is kind of beloved here in Denver, fan favorite guy. His dad and he have the barbecue sauce company and all that. So that's a lot of fun. But I mean, DJ's he's a good run plug guy and an excellent, I think, kind of grew into the role that he played last year for kind of the first time. He was more of a nose last year than really ever before. Whereas he'd kind of been a three tech, 1 to a 3 tech most of his career, and he was kind of playing the 0 and the 1 a little bit last year. And I think that was good because it allowed John Franklin Myers and Zach Allen on the other sides of him to do a couple of different things and make that a little bit more versatile on the line. So I think getting DJ back is big. I think it's big for Denver. And interestingly, it puts a 49er at basically every level of the defense. As you get DJ on the line, you mentioned Greenlaw and Hufanga, and all those guys have been to a Super Bowl before. And when you think about that, whether or not they won, they've at least been to one. You think about that and you look at that, and every level of defense has somebody who knows what it takes to get there, right? Where maybe some of these younger guys can kind of pick up that energy or pick up some tips from that. And so I think it's a valuable thing to have.
Yeah, and another major storyline with this defensive line position, both Zach Allen and Nick Bonito are seeking new extensions before the 2025 season. Do you think these contracts, these extensions are going to get done, and what could they potentially look like in terms of money?
I believe both of them will get done. With Benito, you're probably looking at, depending on the kind of season that he has, if they get that done before the season starts, you're probably looking at something that winds up in the 25 million per range. And as an edge rusher, that's pretty commensurate with the market. If that thing drags on and then he starts having a great start to the season, that could get a little higher than that. But I think that's kind of the target number right now. Zach Allen, you still got another year, but you're trying to work that out because of the guaranteed money. And what he brings to the table allows some of those other guys like Benito to be able to do what they do. And so I think his number won't be quite as high, but it'll be in that range. And they want to get that done. I mean, he's a key cog in what they do. Vance Joseph brought him over from Arizona when he came over. He's a key part of what it is that they want to do. And so I believe they'll get that done.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the major free agents have already found new teams or been re-signed by their previous team. But out of the players who are still on the market, is there anyone that you would still like to see the Broncos go after?
I mean, I think there's some guys out there that they may have some interest in. It's not, I don't think it's pressing for them, but I think if the market continues to and they continue to sit there, then maybe you can come out there and get them for a cheap deal. They obviously need a punter. I think they'll look at Matt Hack and see what they can get out of that. If not, they may wind up going to the draft. There's a couple of running backs out there. I think J.K. Dobbins might be one you kind of look at and see if you can get him on the cheap. So I think there's a couple of guys out there that they could look at. One thing that's not a priority for the Broncos, and I've tried to tell people this offseason, but everybody wants to argue for whatever reason, is the receiver position. I think they feel like internally they've got a good receiving core. And so maybe they add a lower tier type veteran guy to the room, but you've already added Ingram, who's a big slot. You've added Trent Sherfield, who's a special teamer. Like I don't think they really need to add anybody else to that room at this point. And so, a receiver is probably not something they're in the market for, at least not in free agency, and probably not at the top of the draft either.
Now, you mentioned the wide receiver position. It obviously consists of guys like Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton, Troy Franklin, heading into his second year. Now, when you say that that's not a position that they should prioritize, is that because you think it's at a good enough spot where they don't need to, or there's just other positions that you think they should value a lot more than the wide receiver position?
I think it's both, and it's not really
Mhm.
my opinion. I mean, it's
Yeah.
their opinion. The Broncos are the ones that straight up told us that. I mean, they feel like that the receiving core is good. One name you didn't mention there, Devon Villay, is probably the
Yeah.
biggest name to keep your eye on there. Is Cortland Sutton, if he's even back, he would take over that role in that X position. So something to keep your eye on. Marvin Mims, back half of the season just kept getting better every game. Not the biggest Troy Franklin fan in the world, but they continue to believe in him. So we'll see. But it's like I said, they believe in that young receiving core, and that's borne itself out by the fact that they weren't in on any of these free agent deals. I know it got reported they were in on Debo or Cooper Cup. That's absolute nonsense. They weren't in on either one of them. And so I think that they've held true to their word that they do believe in these young guys, and that's why they're not out there looking for anything else.
So even if they weren't in on Cooper Cup necessarily, when he was released by the Rams, he was one of the main rumored players to potentially go to Denver. One of the main options of that's a place where he could end up. I know it wasn't necessarily going to happen, but would you have liked to see them target him, or are you glad that they stayed away from that?
I think it's probably good that they stayed away from that. I
Mhm.
mean, Cooper Cup's another guy who's been declining production for a number of years. I mean, Cooper Cup's played in the league what 8 seasons and has 2 seasons over 1,000 yards. Litany of injuries. He's 32 years old, declining production. And then who are you taking off the field to put him on? You just signed Evan Ingram, who plays the big slot. And then I mean, Cup's not an X receiver. He's kind of a Z, kind of an F, depending on how you look at it. Are you pulling Marvin Mims off the field? You pulling Evan Ingram off the field? What did you just pay Evan Ingram if you're pulling him off the field? So, for me, there's this whole question of fit. Like, what does Cooper Cup bring to the table that you don't already have? And aside from being old, I can't answer that. So, I guess I'm sort of glad that they didn't do that.
And I mean, this is obviously a younger wide receiver core, so I could definitely see them just trying to stick with the youth in this situation and all the guys that they currently have in there, and then restock when they get older. And I know you mentioned the draft earlier. The Broncos have the 20th pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Are there any specific players or positions that you would like to see them target with that selection?
I mean, me personally, I don't think I've made any secret of the fact that I'm a big Omarion Hampton fan. I think that's something they could look at. I'm not sure Hampton's going to be there at 20, but I think that's something they could look at. The one thing that that I don't think they're doing there. I keep seeing people mocking them to wide receivers or tight ends, and I just don't believe that's the direction they're going there. I think they're looking to see what falls to them at that pick. That maybe there might be a defensive lineman that kind of slips through the cracks and falls in their laps, and gives them a little leverage on future negotiations and to get younger. Because like I said, you just paid DJ Jones, you're probably going to have to pay Zach Allen. Well, then John Franklin Myers is sitting right there too. Do you really want that much money tied up in the defensive line when you could perhaps get younger? So I would not be surprised if a defensive lineman, came through and they wound up doing that, or if a safety fell, that kind of thing. If there's a great player that falls in their lap, I think that's the direction they're going. I don't believe they're targeting wide receiver or tight end there. I just don't, and that's from having discussions again with the direction that they think this thing is going. So, personally, Amarian Hampton's somebody I like. The question
Yeah.
is whether or not he's even going to be there.
Now, I mean, the running back room right now on this team is obviously not great. They just lost Javonte Williams to the Cowboys. Their current running back room consists of Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime. You mentioned how big of a fan you are of Amarian Hampton from UNC. Is there something in particular that really stands out about him, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, as a player, he's got great balance after contact. He runs hard. He's a violent runner, but he catches well out of the backfield. He pass protects well. You got to be able to do all those things, in a Sean Payton offense. So, I think that he brings the ability to be an every down back to the table without having to be one because this system doesn't really do that. So,
Yeah.
I don't think when you put him out there, you're not losing anything. Like when you put McLaughlin out there, you sort of know what you're doing, right? Because he's not back there to pass protect. He's going to get smoked. If Max Crosby's coming around the corner, Jaleel McLaughlin's not saving you. So, it's one of those things where you kind of know what you're doing when you put him out there. He's either running the ball or he's out in a pass pattern. And so, you want to get the kind of running backs that when you put them in there, they're not tipping their hand. You're not tipping your hand on what you're doing on offense before the snap. And so, I think having somebody like Hampton, who's 225, 6 foot 225, runs well, catches well, and all that kind of stuff. You're not tipping your hand when you put him out there. You could be doing anything.
Now you said you're not really sure he's going to fall to number 20. Let's say that he doesn't. Let's say that the Broncos aren't able to add another running back before the start of this season. What do you think the distribution is going to look like between Estime and McLaughlin?
Well, they'll add a running back. Whether that's in free agency or in the draft, they'll add at least one more running back. I promise you that. So, in terms of the distribution, I'm not even sure either one of those guys will be there if they get the running backs that they want. I think they'll give it. The way it's probably going to shake out is you're probably adding one or two more backs to the room, and then in training camp, process of elimination will take care of itself. But I think they looked at that running back room and did not have positive grades on the running backs last year. So unless somebody gets hurt as we get into the season, I would not expect Estime and McLaughlin to have very large shares in terms of the running back room.
Yeah, now another move that the Broncos have made over the offseason, hiring Darren Rizzi to be their new special teams coordinator slash assistant head coach. He was obviously the interim head coach with the New Orleans Saints last season. What changes can we expect to see this season now that Rizzi is a part of the coaching staff?
I don't know that you're going to see a lot of huge number of
Mhm.
changes. I mean, Mike Westhoff and Ben Kwiatkowski were running the special teams here last year, and there were some issues here or there, but they got most of that patched up. I think with Rizzi, you'll see him put his own stamp on it. We've certainly seen him come up with some aggressive plays here or there from the special team side of the house. We saw some of those with the Broncos last year. So I think Sean Payton has a philosophy where every couple of games he wants to steal a possession from his opponents. He used to do that with onside kicks. Now that that's sort of outlawed or you have to declare them, I think you'll see a little bit more in the fake punt department. Certainly, we saw that in the Buffalo playoff game. And a matter of fact, they had a second fake punt. They had a second fake punt in that game they wanted to use and never got the opportunity to do it. But they had a second fake punt that they had prepared for that game as well. And so, I think you'll see maybe a little bit more that sort of aggression on special teams this coming season.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you hear about the guys like Bo Nix, you hear about the guys like Pat Surtain. Are there any under the radar players entering this season that you think could take a big jump for this team?
Well, that question got asked to me last year, and I said Nick Benito. So I guess I'm going to take my win there and kind of run with it. Jonah Ellis, the pass rusher. I mean, Coop got paid. Jonathan Cooper got paid, and Nick Benito's going to get paid. But Jonah Ellis was drafted to be the third guy in that rotation. He's very young, but he's very talented. I think he had what, five and a half sacks last year, something like that. He's very talented. As he continues to work his way into the rotation, I suspect you'll see a lot more of him, especially on pass specific type downs, and maybe a little bit less of John Cooper at times, as they work forward. He's the future at the position, and I think ultimately in a couple of years it's probably him and Nick Benito at the edge instead of John Cooper. So keep your eye on Ellis as the third and rotational edge rusher.
And obviously, the Broncos made the wild card round last year in the playoffs where they lost to the Buffalo Bills, held their own in the first half. It was a rough second half for them. With Bo Nix entering his second season in the NFL, what are realistic expectations we can set for this Broncos team in 2025?
Well, I think that's the question. Last year everybody set the bar at what, 5.5 wins, and they blew that out of the water.
Yeah.
But they're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. Everybody
Mhm.
knows what's coming. Nobody's sitting there napping on Bo Nix this year. So I think that's something you have to sort of take into consideration. The sophomore slump is something that's sort of real because defensive coordinators, they get a tape on you, right? You get a year's worth of tape on somebody, and then you get a whole off season to study that, and then all of a sudden, they come up with ways to stop you. We saw that with the Houston Texans and C.J. Stroud this past year. Everybody was talking about he's the next Pat Mahomes. Well, defensive coordinator's got an offseason to study the tape, and all of a sudden he looked pretty mortal. So, I think that's the thing. The thing is with Bo and with the Broncos is how do defenses try to stop him, and then how does he react to and overcome that? And if he's able to figure that out quickly and continue to push forward, I think they'll be a good team. If not, then you may have some problems. And so to answer your question, I mean, what are the Broncos this year? I mean, you're in a tough division. You've got the
Yeah.
Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Raiders got Pete Carroll now, so they figured to at least be competitive. I don't know. For me, I would say that once you've made the playoffs, you kind of got to keep making the playoffs, right? The bar gets reset there.
Yeah.
But if they don't make the playoffs this year and they take a step backwards, is that a big disappointment? I don't know. I would say that they're probably around a 500 team. I know that the fan base kill me for saying that, but I mean that's what I had last year. I had them at 9 wins, and I think they finished with like 9, 10 wins, whatever it was. So this year I think about the same thing. I think they're about an 8 or 9 win team. I don't think they've done anything that's appreciably changed that. The question is how many. Is how quickly your defense is figuring out Bo Nix and how well does he adjust to it?
Yeah, now I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
Network. Shake every hand, make friends. Never don't sit there and dump on people online. Tearing somebody down is never going to build you up. Network, make friends, because I will tell you, I am living proof that it is not what you know, it is who you know. And so anytime that you have the opportunity to make a new friend, try to do so, especially in this industry. Any chance you get to meet somebody new and learn something new, try to leave every room having met someone new and learn something new. And I promise you, if you do that, you will have a lengthy career.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find your work if they want to check out some stuff that you do?
Oh, they don't need to follow me. I'm a dumpster fire. I suck. But they can follow you. Follow Matt Heisman right there. You guys need to follow this guy. He's an up and comer.
Again, I really appreciate you for coming on. Again, big thanks to Benjamin Allbright for being the 51st ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.